Welcome back to America Decides. In the days leading up to the election, Donald Trump filed an FCC complaint against the Washington Post, reportedly sent a letter to the New York Times threatening legal action, and filed a lawsuit against ABC News earlier this year and against us, CBS News, last month. Now, after winning the election, President-elect Trump told Fox News he will be, quote, open and available to the press, unquote, unless he is, and this is another quote, not treated fairly. Max Tani joins us now. He's a media editor for Semafor. Max, good to have you with us. You know as well as I do, and I have lived experience with this, Trump loves and hates the media in equal measure, and they toggle back and forth. What do you think we ought to brace ourselves for in this incoming administration?
Well, it's a great question, and you know better than most people because you covered his first time in office. And I think it changes by the minute, and oftentimes it's both at once. I think that what we've seen, as you mentioned, in the past several weeks, Trump has resumed his litigious and also kind of the legal threats that characterized some of his first time in office, threatening the New York Times, threatening Penguin Random House, and of course, the lawsuit filed against CBS. So certainly we expect that Trump is going to continue his kind of no holds barred legal strategy against the press. At the same time, we also saw him meeting at Mar-a-Lago with the hosts of Morning Joe. He clearly reads the news. He pays attention to it more than pretty much anybody else. He is, of course, staffing his administration, hopes to staff his White House with people mostly from Fox, but folks who've appeared across media outlets. So I think it's a continued love-hate relationship. I think that this new administration, the new White House, wants to try to continue to build its relationships with alternative media, the podcasters, the so-called manosphere, some of the people who helped him propel him into office this time around. So I think we might see him experiment with that, but I think he is going to continue to play hardball with many of us in the more traditional media, the traditional press.
Max, what significance, if any, do you place in the nomination or the proposed nomination of Brendan Carr as FCC commissioner? He has a lot of support from Elon Musk and an overall orientation to the media that you would describe as?
Somewhat hostile, I would say. Maybe perhaps that's an understatement. You know, it is hard to say what's going to happen. Obviously, you know, the FCC, the way it's structured, there are multiple, you know, it's meant to kind of balance a lot of different opinions from officials who are involved. Carr has expressed a desire to open up media ownership. He has expressed a desire to end Section 230, which you know, has to do with free speech and what can be said on platforms, if I'm not mistaken, which actually in some ways would not benefit Elon Musk. A lot of things that are happening on his platform, I think, would be threatened by a change to that rule. So it's, you know, like many things with Trump, it is very, very difficult to see what is going to happen, because it seems like some of the things that Carr has supported actually kind of cut against some of the things that are supported by other people who are in Trump's orbit, including Musk. So, you know, TBD, I think.
Right. And just briefly, Section 230, the way it's written now, platforms are not held in any way legally accountable or responsible for things that appear on their platforms. That's not true of CBS News. That's not true of newspapers. And altering that would change the platform's approach to what their level of accountability or legal exposure would be to what appears on their platforms. That would be a big change.
I mean, it would change pretty much everything about our experience on social media. I think that it would open up a tremendous amount of legal risk for the major social media platforms. And I find it hard to believe that if they actually pursued this, they would be supported by Elon Musk. His platform really depends on the idea that he and Twitter X now cannot be held legally responsible for the things that folks like myself and others post on there. So I think it would be a very, very strange situation if they did indeed decide to pursue this, and I think it would be at odds with his interests. But you never know with Elon, and you certainly don't know all the time with Trump either.
And with about a minute left, Max, the president-elect has gone back and forth on TikTok. Any idea where that might land? Ban or no ban?
I This is, again, purely speculative. Of course, many people remember that it was Trump's first administration, the first go around, that explored a TikTok ban. In some ways, if you look at it, TikTok may have helped propel him into the presidency this time. He's got ties to folks who who both support and oppose it. I think it's too soon to tell. I think it's likely not going to happen. That's my read on the situation from talking to folks. But again, Trump is mercurial, and he changes his mind. He's completely flipped on this, and so it's possible that he could flip again.
Max Tani with Semafor. Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.